Okay, and we're back for chapter 1, part 2, just like I said. So, when it comes to the juvenile justice system, there are two main sources of referrals, how a juvenile gets into the juvenile justice system. The first is through law enforcement agencies, and the second is through parents, victims, schools, and probation officers. So, you fill out what's called a petition. We'll go over that in a few minutes. But the complainant completes a petition to send it to the court system. Now, you can do a diversion. This is a procedure by which a juvenile is removed from the juvenile justice process and provided with treatment services. You have a child, and I've done this, that really, really, really needed some mental health support. And rather than adjudicate the child, we opted to send them to an intensive therapeutic program. And that was a diversion. They were removed from the criminal justice system and the criminal justice processes, or the juvenile justice processes, and excuse me, and provided with treatment. And now you have the whole juvenile court. So what happens there? First of all, you have intake. This is where the juvenile court personnel decide whether to process a case further, sending it to court, handle it informally, or to dismiss the case. Maybe there just wasn't enough to prove the case itself. But then you have the informal handling. So there are some requirements that need to be met. The first is victim restitution. This is a sanction by which the juvenile offender pays the victim for harm done. Community service, and this is a sanction where the juvenile offender is required to perform a predetermined number of hours of volunteer work. And then you have informal probation. And that's a process by which a juvenile agrees to meet certain requirements in exchange for dismissal of a case. So sometimes, though, you have the prosecution, and sometimes it's waived to adult court. That's that waiver that I was talking about. That was an automatic waiver for certain offenses, or used to be an automatic waiver for certain offenses. And now you go through the waiver process, this process through which juvenile court relinquishes jurisdiction over the juvenile offender, and the case is processed in an adult court. But in a juvenile court system, they are adjudicated. This is a decision by a juvenile court judge that a juvenile committed a delinquent act. Remember, delinquent act is anything that would be considered a crime if they were an adult. And the disposition, it's the equivalent of the sentencing phase in a criminal case. You can get probation. This is a disposition imposed by the court, allowing the adjudicated offender to remain in the community under certain conditions, like school attendance, not getting in trouble again, watching who they're hanging out with, yada, yada, yada. And then you have residential placement. This is such as an institution, a camp, excuse me, a ranch, or a group home. And again, let's do a little bit of comparison. And if you're following along, you should be with a PowerPoint. I'm going by the PowerPoint on this. In the juvenile justice system, you operate under the assumption that youth behavior is malleable, changeable. Rehabilitation is the viable goal. It's believed that you can rehabilitate them. And youth are in families and they're not independent. However, in the criminal justice system, the adult system, sanctions should be proportional to the offense. General deterrence works, and rehabilitation isn't a primary goal. It's more of a secondary, maybe even a tertiary goal. In the juvenile justice system, you have specific delinquency prevention activities that are utilized. And in the criminal justice system, the adult system, they're generalized and they're aimed at deterrence. They're aimed at trying to stop this person, specifically from committing crime, or just the population in general from committing crimes. And then prevention is intended to change individual behavior. And it's focused on reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors. Risk factors such as, poor school performance. Protective factors is school success. And in the juvenile justice system, youth are diverted away from the system and often into alternative programs. In the criminal justice system, law enforcement exercises discretion to divert offenders out of the criminal justice system. And this is the cop who chooses not to arrest somebody, or write somebody a ticket, instead hoping that their educational incentive worked. In the juvenile system, there's some severe limitations placed on public access to the information, i.e., oh, so sorry. Sorry, that's an allergy yawn. It's so weirdness. But in the adult system, you have open access. Arrest records are public. It's public information. The arrest reports are printed in the local newspapers. In the juvenile justice system, there are specialized juvenile units that work most of the time only with juveniles, because there's so much specificity as it relates to juveniles that you want to make sure that you get it right. And then some additional behaviors are prohibited, like you can't skip school. And there's a lot of different things. Juvenile court intake decides what cases to file. In the adult system, plea bargaining is very common. Juveniles filing a petition for court action based on social and legal factors. Adults, prosecution decision based on legal fact. Juveniles, intake or prosecutor diverts cases from formal processing to services operated by the juvenile court, the prosecutor's office, or outside agencies. Adults, prosecution exercises discretion to withhold charges or divert offenders out of the criminal justice system. Juveniles, a significant portion of cases are diverted from formal case processing. Adults, prosecution is valuable in building history for subsequent offenses. Juveniles may be detained for their own protection or the community's protection. Adults, accused individuals have the right to apply for bond or bail to obtain release. Juveniles may not be confined with adults unless there is a sight and sound separation. Juveniles, court proceedings are quasi-civil and may be confidential. In most cases, they are confidential. Adults, all proceedings are open. Juveniles, guilt is established. The youth is adjudicated delinquent regardless of the offense. Adults, guilt must be established on individual offenses charged for conviction. Juveniles, right to jury trial not afforded in all states. Adults, defendants have a constitutional right to a jury trial. There have been some Supreme Court cases regarding the juvenile right to a jury. I don't know about you, but when I was 16, I wouldn't have wanted a jury of my peers, aka other 16-year-olds, deciding my fate for nothing. Juveniles, the decisions are based on individual and social factors, the offense severity, and the history. The adult system, decisions are bound primarily by the severity of the current offense and by the offender's criminal record. Juveniles, philosophy includes a rehabilitation component. Adults, philosophy is based largely on proportionality and punishment. Juveniles, indetermination based on progress demonstrated. Adults, sentences determinate based largely on the offense. In fact, we have mandatory sentencing. If you commit the offense of rape in the state of Georgia, you will be sentenced to a minimum of 25 years imprisonment. That just is. Juveniles, alternatives are operated by the juvenile court. They have community-based and residential services, and orders may be directed to people other than the offender. You can actually force parents to take parenting classes in a juvenile case. In the juvenile system, function combines surveillance and reintegration activities. This is part of that parole, the aftercare. Remember, in the adult system, it would be considered parole, and the juvenile system is called aftercare. In the criminal justice system, the function of parole is primarily surveillance and reporting to monitor illicit behavior. So, is there any overlap? Well, yes. Yes, there is. So, the first piece of overlap is the operating assumption. Community protection is always the primary goal, whether it's dealing with juveniles or dealing with adults. Community protection is the primary goal. The second piece is that law violators must be held accountable. and that constitutional rights apply. Like I said, just because you're under the age of 18 doesn't mean you don't get constitutional rights. The second is prevention, educational approaches to specific behaviors. There were times when I would stop a car and I would, hey, you're fast, post speed limit in this area is 45 miles per hour. Do you have any legal justification? Oh, I didn't know. Okay, you need to be more aware of your surroundings. I use it as an educational opportunity. So it don't have to be explicit educational opportunities. They can be implicit. The law enforcement aspect, similarity between juveniles and adults. Jurisdiction involves all criminal behavior. There are constitutional and procedural safeguards that exist. You cannot question a juvenile unless you read them Miranda. Period. They still have a right to their Fourth Amendment rights, to their Fifth Amendment rights, their Sixth Amendment rights. You cannot suspend that. There are both reactive and proactive approaches that can be used in both the adult and the juvenile systems. Community policing strategies are all over this. And you do that because if you want to take the opportunities to make a difference. And not just, enforcing the law isn't always about enforcing the law. Enforcing the law is about changing lives too. So the intake and the prosecution, you still have to have probable cause. It doesn't matter if it's a juvenile or an adult, you must have probable cause. And the prosecutor acts on behalf of the state in both the adult and the juvenile systems. As it relates to detention and lockup, the accused can be held in custody to ensure their appearance in court. If they're a runaway, it's kind of hard to not detain them because they've already proven they have a habit of beating feet. And then there are some detention alternatives with, electronic detection and, house arrest and stuff like that. You have the adjudication and conviction. Again, you must have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Doesn't matter if they're adult or juvenile. Proof must be beyond a reasonable doubt. Everybody has right to an attorney. Everybody has right to confront witnesses, and everybody has right to remain silent. Again, constitutional rights apply regardless of age. And it can be appealed to a higher court or experimented with in specialized courts. You have accountability court, a mental health court, teen courts. So there's a lot of different options. As it relates to disposition and sentencing, the decisions are influenced by the current offense, offending history, and social factors. Do they have a home? It's an important factor. Decisions to hold offenders accountable. And you can give consideration to victims as well, even in a juvenile case. And decisions may not be cruel or unusual. Again, Eighth Amendment right, you cannot violate people's constitutional rights. And as it relates to aftercare and parole, individuals released from correctional settings are monitored, and violations of conditions can result in reincarceration. It doesn't matter if you're an adult or a juvenile. If you violate the terms of aftercare or probation or parole, you can go back to jail or prison or an institution. And I hope that this laid some really good groundwork for you. Again, if you have questions, hit me up, email me. I look forward to this whole semester. I love this new text, and I really love this topic. So thanks, guys.